Welcome to Sheth Leadership Academy. I'm Professor Jagdish Sheth. September 27, 2018 is the World Tourism Day. And this particular presentation is all about how India can aspire to become a major global tourist destination. Tourism is a key industry in every economy. Some economies totally depend on tourism. Some economies have transformed themselves from, let's say, rugged terrain to tourism, like Alaska, for example, New Zealand to some extent. Some economies have been strictly islands, doing nothing but become tourist destinations. Many Pacific islands, Caribbean islands, we can think about examples. I think for India's future, tourism should become a strategic industry where government and the private sector collaborate together in a public-private partnership and grow the industry in a bigger way. Here are the reasons why tourism matters in India. In 2017, travel and tourism contributed $220 billion toward India's GDP, or 9.4%. I think it is underreported because in tourism industry in India, there's a huge amount of cash economy. So the amount here may be more contribution than what the government data can track properly. It also provided 41 million jobs, or 8% of total employment. This is definitely much more underrepresented because many jobs are strictly contracts. There are basically barter arrangements in the tourism business, and therefore I think actually the total employment provided by tourism may be about 10% rather than 8%. Tourism is expected to grow at least 7% annually, and by 2028, travel and tourism in India will contribute $470 billion to our Indian economy, and I think that number will clearly exceed above 500 billion easily, with greater transparency of transactions, less and less cash economy, more and more digitization of the industry. All of this will show faster growth. It'll actually kick in the growth for the overall GDP growth of India, which is a major indication about how foreign investment and foreign involvement into the country may become significant indicator. Total employment is expected to rise to at least 52 million jobs in 2028. And I think, again, this will be slightly conservative estimate. It'll be much more than that. Close to about 60 million is my expectation. Travel and tourism is the third largest foreign exchange earner for India. It earned $28 billion in 2017, and 25 million Indian tourist visitors came to India, or international tourist visitors came to India in 2017. I think this is on a takeoff now with better international airlines landing in more airports in India, with better communication, better promotion. So I expect these numbers to jump much higher. Most interesting part about India's tourism is domestic tourism. It exceeded 1.5 billion people in 2016. Most of that has to do with religious pilgrimages, for example. Most of them have to be family vacations. But it's a very important segment. 1.5 billion people is lots of tourists. One is to focus on domestic travel, tourism, as then we need to focus on international or foreign travel and tourism. Surprisingly, international tourist visits in India exceeded, as I mentioned, 25 million visitors, and it is growing at 15% per year, which is twice the growth of the economy itself. Largest international tourists are from Bangladesh, followed by United States, and finally followed by United Kingdom. Then it drops off enormously. Bangladesh, I think, is really not a proper representation because many Bangladeshis come to India as guest workers in the IT services, maybe even in agriculture, and then they go back. I've seen this more in the IT services where Bangladeshis fly in from Dhaka to Calcutta, for example, work whole week and then go back, as they do to Singapore or many other places in the Asian region. What matters most in my mind is that this is a sector which is so critical for creating economic growth, for creating employment, for creating tremendous amount of potential for the nation. If it gets the same attention like many SEZs have got, let's say in manufacturing and definitely in IT and IT services. There does not appear to be a focused strategy either by the private sector or by the Tourism Board of India. This is unfortunate because India probably has the best ingredients possible for tourism but does not seem to have a recipe. It has a natural coastline. There's a lot of things one can do on the beaches, for example, and diving places, and one can just imagine how island economies have become tourist destinations. India has a huge potential. India, of course, has the whole cultural heritages. There are many relics which are thousands of years old or totally neglected. Access to them alone is a major issue within India. So to me, we have cultural heritage, we have historic heritage, we have in fact nature blessing us from mountains to rivers to the oceans. But this sector is more and more unorganized rather than organized, therefore inefficient. Too many middlemen are involved, too many connections have to be made, and therefore it has too much friction. What it needs, therefore, is a focused strategy to reduce the friction from point A to point B to point C. Most of that is in supply chain, not as much on the demand side, as the back office operations have to be streamlined, have to be automated, have to be digitized. And the third element that I wanted to recommend is very important in addition to digitization of the industry. Airlines are digitized, we know, but from airlines onwards, everything is still more manual and could be digitized given that we have mobile telephone systems in place, smartphones are growing, and most people have at least mobile phones. It can be done. It's a question of organizing it, very similar to what government has done for Aadhaar, government has done for biometric examination of the Indian population. The third element is India's tourism industry must target Chinese tourists to become a global destination. And here are the reasons. The tourism growth engine worldwide are the Chinese tourists. And unless you participate, your share of the world market will go down more and more. For example, in year 2000, a modest 10.5 million visits were made by Chinese residents. Fast forward to 2017, and the figure was 145 million Chinese going abroad. By 2030, Chinese tourists will surpass 400 million people. Just the sheer size, the scale is enormous. Chinese tourists spent $262 billion in 2016, up from only $10 billion in 2000. America's Globetrotters parted with a relatively paltry $124 billion. In other words, Chinese, like every Chinese industry, consumer industry, travel and tourism is already exceeding the largest tourist market at one time, which was America, largest tourist market, and followed by Japan, for example. China is in a different scale. So one has to participate about how to attract Chinese tourists into India and what can we offer to them as very specialized segment and a target market. The most popular destinations of Chinese tourists so far are Thailand, Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, and Singapore. Among the top 10 destinations, of course, Chinese tourists are now going to United States quite a lot and to Italy. My view is that China is the Asian neighbor. They are already traveling into the ASEAN countries and in East Asia. It's a matter of extending more from Myanmar on to India. It's very simple. So how can India become a global tourist destination? So here are 9 separate recommendations. Each one is a standalone. There are interconnected dots. One can impact the other in a positive way, but here are the key recommendations. First one is promote tourism in China and in Asia. As Indians go abroad to Thailand or to Singapore or to Cambodia or to Malaysia, one can do reciprocity, the reverse. Thai should come here, Chinese should come here, Singaporeans should be visiting India also. So promoting and focusing in Asia, look east is very key important recommendation. My second recommendation is to develop branded package tours for Asian cultures. Remember, when tourists come, it's not just looking at the sites, historical, cultural, whatever they are, but they have to live there. They have to eat food. They have their own rituals, their hotel accommodations, whatever they are. But primarily food and beverages is very important. It has to be much more Asia-centric, culturally sensitive, etc., etc. And creating a branded package, tour packages are very key, as Thailand does, for example. China is doing it now. One can learn quite a lot. Third, and probably the most important recommendation, is to shift the whole industry to a mobile digital technology. In other words, Digital India initiative that the government is creating and encouraging more and more digitization. This industry should be targeted. If necessary, somebody has to create a platform software so that everybody in the tourism industry, from the lowest educated population that serves the industry to the biggest sophisticated databases, ought to be on the same platform. Whatever that platform is, could be the Android platform itself, could be the Apple platform, whatever the platforms are, but one has to create almost a mandatory, if necessary, shifting from the paper and pencil or a phone system, cell phone, voice-based, to more and more cell phone digital, smart phone-based digital technology. That will go a long way to reduce all the friction. It is like the Uber of tourism. When I have traveled in many countries, I was absolutely incredibly fascinated how I could have access Uber anywhere. New Zealand is a key example. I went about 2 years ago, and it was absolutely incredible. Any place I could go, I could travel myself using Uber as a system. It doesn't have to be Uber, but something like Uber has to be encouraged within the country. For tourism, that means not just the metro areas, but throughout the country. And now that we do have a national 4G platforms and smartphones evolution, this is much more doable today than it would have been 5-10 years ago. Next one, equally important, is require certification of all the jobs in this industry. This is a very labor-intensive industry. The person who serves the tourists matters as much. It's not the product alone or the offering or the price, but the people. And the biggest asset India has is its human capital. But that's like a rough diamond. It needs to be polished. It needs to be professionalized, not only in the mannerism, speaking of multiple languages, including English, More importantly, having a uniform and a dress code, approaching the tourist right, coming on time, punctuality, whatever we think about. But certification is a very key. And this is very doable because we do certify in the hospitality industry. We create world-class hospitality industry or hotel people, personnel all over the world. India is great. We do quite well with the airline industry, which is a part of tourism. But when it comes to tourism itself, we are pretty much more unorganized, inefficient, and probably, in fact, not really as well professionalized. And the only way out is to certify all the occupations, as many other countries have done, because tourism is a very strategic key industry, depending almost 80% of their whole livelihood depends on tourism in some countries. Next is point number 5, focus on festivals for domestic tourism. And we can organize festivals not around the big religious holidays and the pilgrimages, but India is blessed with holidays. Each state has its own holidays and festivals. You have, for example, Shakrant, or whatever we call it in South India. Villagers come in the cities, but still not as well organized. How can we create organized festivals based tourism for domestic travelers? Could be international, but will be largely domestic. Rajasthan has done a good job, especially desert tourism. Kutch is doing very good under Prime Minister Modi when he was the Chief Minister, created a huge kite festival in Ahmedabad, and of course Run, Kutch of Run, very much a good tourism for going into the run. It can be done. Does not have to be only for foreign tourists, for domestic travel equally. I think it will be very good for domestic travel. It gets more organized and safety rises properly in the process. One can manage safety, security concerns, etc. Target destination tours for different events. For example, destination tourism for weddings are becoming more popular. Many Japanese always went to Honolulu to get married, or in Hawaii. They are going to Thailand quite a lot now. The whole wedding tourism is a big business. That's just one example. We already talked about the medical tourism, and India will exceed about 1 million visitors easily from out of the country for medical tourism. But given the scale and the size of Indian population, one can create medical tourism for domestic population also. So there are many destination tourism packages that can be created, customized to particular that event, whether it's conventions, for example, whether it is in fact, as I said, religious packages, whatever they are, but destination is a key concept and that can be done. Next one is very key, in my view. Expand the domestic travel. Not only more frequency between cities, but as much as possible the second and the third tier cities, because many of the cultural locations or historical locations are not easily accessible. While we have built the roads in some states quite well, primarily for easy travel, safe travel for that matter, but that is not going to be enough. People are constrained more by time today and not just by money. So how can we time friendly? And the only way to become more time friendly is to have the airlines grow enormously into the second tier and the third tier cities and connect those. And we have very good success. Airlines like Indigo, for example, have done wonderfully well by connecting second tier cities either to major hubs or second tier to second tier cities. I think that's very key backbone infrastructure investment that will be important and will do very well, add to the tourism data, growth rate will be much greater as we are going to do about the digital transformation of the industry. Point number 8, learning from other emerging markets. I think emerging markets have their own constraints, their own socio-political institutions, they have their own roadblocks or speed bumps or friction. Learning from them is more important than learning from more advanced economies. And there are some very good examples. Mexico is absolutely incredibly good in tourism. So is South Africa. So is, of course, Thailand. We can learn if they can organize in their constrained environment, India can do it also. We cannot have no excuses to say it can't be done because we don't have this infrastructure or that infrastructure. These countries have done very well and tourism has become backbone industry for their GDP. Finally, India must compete in tourism for global awards. Airlines do very well. Many of the airlines, Indian airlines like Jet Airways at one time, my memory, and others are getting global recognition and global awards. So what is done in the airline industry with the same physical infrastructure, strengths and weaknesses can be done for other tourism aspects. So I have 9 separate recommendations, and I think each one of them is very realistic and practical, can be executed. It may require a public-private partnership, but definitely a cooperation between the private sector and the government sector. So my conclusion is very simple. Travel and tourism is a key contributor to India's GDP as well as employment. In fact, it can easily contribute 10 to 12% of the GDP, grow faster than the average GDP, and is one of the largest employers of people, and you give ordinary people an extraordinary job opportunity, professionalism. Basically, you are shaping a rough diamond into a polished, brilliant diamond. That is the strength of India, its people, and one can professionalize that whole human capital. Domestic tourists are the backbone and should be the target for even higher growth than what natural organic growth is coming without any intervention or marketing efforts or operational efficiency, digitization, whatever we can say. Travel and tourism is the third largest foreign exchange earner for India. Therefore, international tourists are strategic to the nation. Actually, it can easily exceed to be number 2 if possible. If diamonds is a very large industry, Hollywood is a large industry, IT and IT-enabled services is already crossing $100 billion, tourism can do even better, or at least as good as IT services. So one can learn what did we do in the IT-enabled services. It was all human capital, small investment in infrastructure, getting strong traction in foreign markets. I think it can be done. The best target markets are China. There is no way one can ignore Chinese market, followed by Asia. Asia is going to also grow better than the global GDP. That includes Japan, South Korea, and the whole ASEAN countries. It is important to deploy end-to-end digital technology, Uberization of tourism industry, and reduce the friction inherent in travel and tourism. There are a lot of friction points. Focus on festivals and offer branded package tours. We need to do more branding, not of tourism as an industry, but specific offerings that make in the marketplace. Certification of all jobs in tourism should be mandatory to professionalize the industry. There are many other industries where you have to have a mandatory professionalization, chartered accountancy, legal service, medical service, why not tourism? Learning from other emerging markets such as Mexico, South Africa, and Thailand are also key to unlocking India's potential. So I'm very bullish on future of India's tourism, and I think it can actually accelerate enormously and become a major global tourist destination, similar to what Egypt has done, for example, similar to what Australia has done, New Zealand has done, and the most remarkable story is Iceland becoming a tourist destination. It is a rugged country. There is nothing really. But they could go from the agriculture or pretty much a rugged terrain to a tourism industry is remarkable. So if Iceland can do it, if New Zealand can do it, India can do better. Thank you.